Hello everyone, we're back with another week of The Perfect 10, my 10-week series that I'm running on future skills. So the top 10 skills that I believe organizations have to develop now and in the future in order for the organization and its people to thrive. I am Marilise de Villiers. I'm a performance coach, best-selling author and cybersecurity change consultant. So the Perfect 10 is on my YouTube channel called Your Bullyproof Life. The role of Your Bullyproof Life is to encourage conversation about how organizations can create safe and inclusive workplace cultures. I also shine a spotlight on workplace bullying, the subject of my book Raw, How to Tame the Bully Inside and Out. I believe that workplace bullying is still largely a silent epidemic in our workplace today. So this week we're going to talk about the skill of dignity. I can't believe we're already in week 7. As human beings, we are all wired for connection. Our relationships with others really matter to us, and we all deserve to be treated with dignity. When my relationship with my boss broke down, it caused me great distress. I would only find out much later that the pain I felt from being disconnected to my boss, so the social pain, was as real as physical pain. In fact, social and physical pain follow the same neural pathways in the brain. So the negative feelings I had after a bad interaction with my boss, they weren't just in my head. I wasn't just imagining things. They were real. The wounds that we inflict on one another during a breakdown in a relationship is not only painful, it's also humiliating. Words that take aim at dignity can inflict pain that is devastating. But unlike physical injury, there is no blood, there are no broken bones, there are no visible signs of wounds. But believe me, the scars, the invisible scars, cut deep. They remain invisible, causing people to suffer in silence. It seems really hard to imagine, but the disconnections that happen between people are often not consciously motivated. It is remarkable what leaders can fail to notice if they are not attuned to dignity issues. So I'm absolutely delighted today to welcome Tracey Groves and Joel Segal as my guests, where we will explore the skill of dignity and what it takes to honor dignity, and for leaders what it takes to lead with dignity. So let me tell you a little bit more about Tracey and Joel. Tracey Groves is a trusted business advisor, expert facilitator and executive educator, critical friend and inspiring business speaker with deep consulting and business transformation experience working with boards and senior business leaders. At PwC for over 25 years, the last 6 years as a UK forensics partner, Tracey's specialism is in advising leaders and providing consultancy services on corporate governance and sustainability, ethical leadership, corporate integrity, cultural change and social behaviours, digital ethics, regulatory compliance, and inclusion and belonging. Joel previously held partnerships at EY and PwC for over 20 years as a strategic advisor to C-suites and boards of FTSE 100 multinationals and private companies. His passion is centered around supporting leaders and boards to develop future-fit, high-performing businesses able to disrupt and evolve in their industry. Joel recently joined the leadership team of Cognia Law, a leading law company, to support their rapid scale-up and develop future-fit legal professionals. Joel is a non-executive member of the British Red Cross and have become a keen photographic artist over the last 10 years, where he explores the disrupted and beautiful world we live in. So I'm going to jump over to Zoom now, as always, to have a chat with Tracey and Joel. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome, Tracey and Joel. I'm so delighted to have you both. And I'm so excited to talk to you about a skill that I believe is so incredibly important. So dignity this week. And I'm going to dive straight into asking you both to share a little bit more about why dignity is so important to you. So Tracey, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, what a wonderful opening question, Marilise. For me, dignity is about the fact that I matter. We all matter. And it's so important, I think, as we experience life, that we believe in ourselves, and that comes from within. And when I've gone through some really challenging times in my life, when I've had to make choices and decisions about whether it's my career path or my personal life, it's always come from a sense of knowing what my worth is and how much I value myself. And that's been a hard lesson to learn, in fact. Quite often I've sought external validation of who I am and what I stand for. And it's only when I've begun to realise that actually my sense of dignity comes from me and that I matter and I deserve that, that I've really begun to appreciate the power of dignity.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
And I mean, obviously, I've got many of Tracey's perspectives are the same for me. But as I said in my LinkedIn post, I think mine comes from a very early recognition through the work my father did in South Africa during apartheid years to ensure that we treat everyone and value them at their natural self, that it's not defined by race or any other sort of dehumanizing behaviors that society might impose, and that we take people for who they are. And my whole upbringing, and it's taken me a long time to recognize what he instilled in me, is that I almost grew up recognizing that actually it didn't matter about race. In fact, he deliberately sent me to a school in those years that was multiracial, which might sound very strange now saying that in the UK, but in the 70s and 80s, that was really remarkable. And then I think the same applies to other things around belonging and feeling part of a community, is that it isn't at the cost of other communities. One has to go beneath that and actually create a belonging and a sense of connection with everyone that you meet. And therefore dignity is, as I said, it's probably the most important base value that I always hold on to.
Yeah, and to pick up on the South African theme and apartheid, I think Nelson Mandela is probably the icon, the example that we hold up, as someone who had so much dignity, especially after he was released from jail. He could have gone and he could have taken revenge, of all the bad treatment that he's had over the years in prison, and before that. So yeah, so I think as a fellow South African, I really resonate with what you're saying, and yeah, so thank you for sharing, Joel. I appreciate that.
It's so liberating. That's what I love, and particularly just picking up what Joel just said there. It just frees you from self-doubt. And I think this is something which an awful lot of us are, held back by, this sense of, am I good enough? What if somebody were to criticize or challenge? And it's so empowering and freeing in a respect to have that sense of belief in yourself and to know that that value and that worth can't be taken away from you. And that's what Nelson Mandela did so powerfully. Yeah. He was so able to articulate the fact that he stood for something that was so grounded from within, and no one could take that away from him.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. Amazing. So Tracey, when you did your introduction, I think you've sort of picked up on the Oxford definition of dignity, which is about worthy of honor and respect, that sort of value that and you have that self-worth, you know. So the way that the Oxford Dictionary defines it is the state or quality of being worthy of honor or respect. So if you would just have to say to someone, how would you define dignity in sort of practical terms, you know, just tell me.
I mean, I would be very simplistic about it, actually, because I think we're at risk of overcomplicating it. Yeah. But it is a sense of your value, yeah, and your inherent sense of value and your self-worth. And for me, as I say, it's really about thinking about equality on a level playing field. Mm-hmm. So we all deserve and have dignity. We don't earn it. Yeah. And that's the difference between, if you think of something like trust, for example, where you earn trust by being trustworthy, and you give and receive trust as a reciprocal contract. With dignity, that doesn't happen. You know, it's your inherent self-value and worth, and that's something which we're all born with. We are all born with this sense of dignity. The challenge we have, and why I know that's part of this, looking at from a skills perspective, do we know how to act with dignity? Yes. How do we honour our own dignity, and most importantly, those of others and the planet around us as well?
Absolutely. So is there a difference between dignity and respect?
Yes, there is. Absolutely. And like trust, respect is earned. And I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Joel, but, you know, respect can be easily lost through, you know, untrustworthy behaviours, through a misalignment between what you say and what you do. Whereas dignity is something which we all have, and it's inherent, and, you know, it's something which is innate within us. And so therefore it becomes something only you can give up. Only you can violate your own dignity if you allow it to be so. And actually, just as powerfully, you can violate other people's dignity as well.
I mean, just to build on Tracy's points, because I think I would say them in similar ways. I think there's someone who I always love watching his little videos, is Simon Sinek. I don't think he did it on dignity, but it actually is about dignity. He has his little video on, I'll just summarize it, but at the base level, we're all a polystyrene cup. We're not this porcelain cup. And having worked in big corporate environments, I think we sometimes dress ourselves up, and we have these titles and all these things, and people wait on us. We go to nice hotels, all of the trappings that come with that. But actually, when you leave that world, you and you set your own path, and you try and act with real moral dignity and direction, you strip that all back, and at the base, everyone is the same. We're just a polystyrene cup, you know. It is what it is, and I think you have to treat everyone in that same way. So that would be my definition, and then I definitely agree with the respect point. They are different. I think dignity, if you had a hierarchy, you know, I love taxonomy. So if you had a hierarchy, I think dignity is that very base level, being valued just for who you are, no matter what. You know, and then things build on that.
And when you honour other people's dignity, when you recognise and you cherish that connection between the two of you, you actually strengthen your own. Right. You know, and that's amazing, because actually it makes you even more fulfilled in terms of your ability to have purpose and to have meaning with who you are and what you do and why you do it as well. So the very act of honouring and valuing others' dignity strengthens and emboldens your own sense of grounding and integrity as well.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, just to kind of link this back to my own personal experience, you know, when I talk about the inner bully, that sort of whole recognition or realization that, you know, when I set out to write my book, it was all about blaming the bully, you know, the person who treated me badly, but then realizing, as you said earlier, Tracy, that you have your internal power, you know, nobody can take that away from you. You've got to give it away, you know. So it comes back to that sense of self-worth, and that you actually really have that grounding and that, you know, sense of self-worth. I think that's so crucial.
But it makes you vulnerable. And this is the paradox. This is, you know, we're talking about it being empowering and emboldening and strengthening, but that means you have to let the shield down. And actually what I'm finding more and more with, especially with in the world that we're living in today, the uncertainty, the pressures we're facing, vulnerability, the ability to connect and allow yourself to be human and to demonstrate that sense of dignity is actually a strength and a tool that we can use to build those powerful connections. So instead of being a weakness, you know, as Brené Brown says, she says, you know, vulnerability is absolutely the greatest strength that you can have in your toolkit as a leader.
Yeah, and I think we, you know, we're seeing more of that. I mean, it's one of the blessings of COVID is that actually this environment has reminded leaders that they have to share more of themselves to create more of a connection. And actually that is such a valuable skill, because in effect, dignity is a two-way street. It's actually built through the connectivity and the interaction with other humans. You know, that's how we really get to understand ourselves, if we truly listen, as well as if we truly support and serve. So you know, in a way, I think that's a really important aspect that people should focus on, and you've said it well, which is that you really are stripping back everything, and being able to do that in a comfortable way, in a safe environment, in all those contexts, is actually the bit that we all need to focus on, and why, you know, Tracy and I guess in the work we do, when we work with organizations around culture and some of those things, that sits at almost the essence, at the basic level of that.
And that theme has been picked up quite sort of regularly throughout the series already, and particularly when we talked about the agility, you know, the skill of agility, and how, you know, the organizations that have been more successful at navigating COVID have been those organizations that had the leaders who put their hands up to say, I do not have all the answers, I'm also struggling, you know, and let's figure this out together. I think that's really, really key. So this is sort of really focusing on the workplace context, you know, so I want to come on to why, you know, dignity is so important in the workplace.
I mean, maybe I can shoot off first on this one. Well, I think at its heart, I mean, I spend a lot of my time focusing on culture, future world of work, leadership. I think we live in an age, particularly work environments, where we know we have a massive issue around inclusiveness, diversity. You know, those are at the forefront of some of our social challenges that we have, both in work but also in society. And I have a very systemic view on that actually work is a manifestation, a reflection of what's going on in society, and it should be treated in a way where, if we can try and solve some of those problems in a context, that actually creates the change that can then go out into society. So if we think about things like ESG, you know, I think there's a lot's been done on the environment piece, but I think right now, if you start to watch that, there's a lot coming through on the social piece. You know, I also sit on the kind of as a non-exec at the Red Cross, and obviously that social purpose is you know, very key. But if we look at what the intent of all of that is, it's really putting a focus on organizations to understand how they become more regenerative. I think the old school is more reductionist. You know, we break things down and make money. Actually, we need to be regenerative. How do we actually regenerate our own organizations, our own cultures, our own ways of doing things, as well as what that then looks like in society? And at the base of that, and that's what's so important, is what we're really trying to create is environments, and I'll use this word because it's very powerful, that have a bit more love in them, if I'm really honest. I know it's a funny word to use in business, but actually you have to start showing more love. You know, it's the fundamental human virtue that says, actually, if I have more of that, I can start to create more belonging. I can start to respect people for their differences, in all of the differences they have. And therefore I create, as my colleague Janet says, a greater belonging for all to participate in.
I love that. That's so amazing. So regenerative as opposed to reduction. I love that. And You know, I think, Joel, we need...
Don't steal all my good lines.
Yeah. we need more guys like you that talk about love, I think, openly, because I think that if I said that, no disrespect or anything, but I think it would have come out a little bit differently. So I love that you've gone there. Yay. Tracy, you?
Well, one of the things which for me is so attractive about dignity in the workplace is it's so dynamic. It's alive, you know, there's a sense of real energy and compassion, another word for love, but, you know, real compassion which we can generate on a daily basis. And I think that's what really challenges us when we look at through a lens of workplace being very binary, very unemotional, very, you know, devoid of any humanity, if I can say that. So in the workplace, this is about going back to the fact that we all matter, and that every day we walk in to the workplace, whether that's in our studies at home, or at our kitchen tables, or absolutely in an office, and we are able to live our whole selves, which means all of the things that come with that, you know, our hopes, our dreams, our fears and our anxieties. And one of the key tenets of dignity is about acceptance. Acceptance of ourselves and acceptance of others. And I say that's what makes, for me, this vibrancy, this dynamism, which means that it's something we can always work on. It's always something that all of us have responsibility for, no matter what our grade or status or role in the workplace. We can all contribute and be part of it. And isn't that most, you know, why wouldn't you want to be part of that? Count me in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But what I'm reflecting on is this disconnect, because what you're describing is like this utopia, and what I'm seeing on a day-to-day basis is just couldn't be more different. You know, there's so much unhappiness, you know, employee engagement is so low, it's shocking. You know, people are just like, you know, going through the motions, and it's like, how do we close that gap? You know, what is actually causing that massive like gap at the moment?
And I think maybe, you know, if I could be contentious, I think there are I think we have to be careful. I think there are organisations who really are making changes there. I think it is a bit like viral. It's not everywhere, so it's in pockets. And the question is, how do you spread those pockets so that more of that happens? You know, I think all three of us are coaches in our own right? So I always come back to, and I think it fits quite nice with dignity, is one of the more simple frameworks, which is the kind of parent, adult, child model. And I think with dignity, what we're really trying to say is for leaders need to not take on a parental role. They need to move into that maturer adult space.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is create the environment, the context, the dialogue that allows everyone to be an adult as well, so that we can have more adult-to-adult relationships. And that then strips away the hierarchy, the structure, the controlling, some of the other negative impacts that one often sees in those environments, that actually then creates what you've described, Marelise, which is people sort of checking out, voting with their feet, saying, this is, you know, I feel like a machine here or a tool. I'm not feeling valued. So I think a lot of it actually comes back to that basic understanding from a psychological perspective is, how do we create the context for both sides? It takes both sides to step into that frame, to say, you know, on an employee side, not to feel subservient, to have dignity and be true to who they are, to not always worry about the hierarchy and the impact of what they're going to say, so that one can have, I think Tracy would say as well, that kind of safe discussion. Because then we can have really mature conversations. We can really get to the nub of things, and then we don't build up some of those negative toxicity that sits in corporate cultures.
Yeah. So,
I mean,
yeah,
sorry, I was just about to, I do a lot of work with organisations on creating what I describe as a climate of voice. Otherwise known as speak up. You know, what can we do to encourage people to speak up? And I much prefer to go back, and again, it's about authenticity and about ownership. What are we doing to encourage people to own their voice and to use it? not just about voicing concerns about behaviours or conduct, but also around innovation and questioning the status quo and about being creative. And one of the things which I'm hearing so much about is that the most common way to violate someone's dignity in the workplace is to make them feel unsafe. The fact is, if I were to use my voice, what would happen to me? And there's lots of research that has been done by a lot of psychologists in terms of what it is that holds people back. And there are two F's that they found. One is the F for fear. So fear of repercussion, fear of the consequences of what will happen to me, either immediately or further on down the line. And the second F is futility. If I were to say something, nothing will happen. And time again, we hear these high-profile scandals and cases whereby whistleblowers have voiced their concerns, and it's been swept under the carpet, and it's a point in time later. VW is a good example when actually someone has come to light and it's actually happened. So, I mean, I genuinely do think that, the psychological safety point, Joel, that you talk about is so important, but actually it's so that we can have more difficult conversations. We can question, we can challenge, we can actually create an uncomfortable place to be comfortable. And that takes courage from leaders, and how many leaders are prepared to do that because of the effort it takes and the time that it takes. And that's when, unfortunately, we can get into that vicious circle that you described, Marie-Lise, where that disconnect does happen. But those who do take that risk and have the courage and are prepared to be vulnerable, go in there and they have a smart, sophisticated conversation, which may actually be quite uncomfortable, but overall will bring some really positive consequences.
Yeah. I actually just had a conversation this morning with Paul Doyle. He's the chairman of a charity called Protect.
Oh, yes.
Their whole mission is actually around creating a safe space for people to speak up, and I just think it's so wonderful, because they've helped over 40,000 whistleblowers, over the last, I think, 30 years they've existed, and they've actually been giving people free legal advice, so there's always, I just want to kind of throw that out there, so if anybody's watching, and you don't feel like you can do that in your organization, and there are other means available. So I'll just throw that in there. It's totally off script, but just a very timely conversation, I think.
They do some fantastic work, and I always recommend them. And they do a great newsletter as well that comes out on a regular basis. And I think making clear that you're not alone.
Correct.
There is absolutely safety and security knowing there is somewhere where you can turn to that can support and help you, because there are others in the same situation as you. It's very comforting.
But can we pick up Tracy's point on conflict? Because I think it's a point that doesn't get written enough about, I don't think, and people talk about it. And I agree with Tracy that it really is essential if you're going to create that right environment for people to feel they can talk up. Because I think, and I've seen it at boards, I've seen it, in organizations, and it cascades to different levels, is that if there isn't enough, what I call cognitive dissonance, I think is the psychological term, but it's basically, if you don't have that, what happens is people talk behind each other's backs. Meetings don't decide things happen off script. You create the gossiping and the kind of backstabbing that goes on in many corporate cultures, and people see that. It's probably worse at the top, but it definitely cascades down. So really creating an environment, we used to have a thing, I think Tracy was with me at the same time at Ernst & Young when I was running the values program. We had this thing, living your values. And one of the things I always hold true, and I still think it's one of the things that probably about 20 years now, that I always talk to people about, is people come to you and they say, I wish that person would do X and Y. And I say, well, what did they say when you told them that? And I say, well, of course I haven't told them. And it's those little things. It's a really powerful one, but it's those little things of, well, why didn't you? Why didn't you disclose what it meant to you? Because it probably was either you feeling your level of dignity was being eroded, or they in their own right were undermining their own dignity by gossiping. So, I think it becomes very dangerous when organizations don't have enough cognitive dissonance, because you create a kind of passive aggressive environment that fundamentally will always lead to fear and some level of toxic involvement. You know, that undermines, unfortunately, all the good that organizations might be trying to do.
And a lack of dignity at its heart. I mean, I'm just thinking, Joel, reflecting on your comments, I remember, and this hasn't happened, it's happened more than once, when I have not responded well to a conversation, and I haven't stood my ground. I've kind of stepped back and allowed the other party just to what I would say, to take a decision which I didn't agree with. So I've walked away from conflict. And by doing so, what I've done is I've wounded my own dignity.
Exactly.
You know, I've allowed myself to, and the feeling that has inside me has been really quite negative. And it's only when I've learned that actually people will, if you position it and frame it in a way whereby I'm doing this because I believe there's a greater outcome for both of us to have this conversation, and through our difference we can work through to get a better outcome, then both parties end up in a better position at the same time. But again, I do wonder whether we need to help people to know how to have that conversation.
Well, I mean, it goes to one of my things I said earlier. I think in particular, if we talk about some of the inclusiveness that we're trying to get right in organizations, and particularly for certain groups or cultures where actually subservience or respect is actually part of how you grow up and do things. I think in some of the organizations I've worked in and others, we have to go actually much further to create the environment for people to really feel comfortable to be able to say what they want to say and not to keep it inside. And I think particularly some of the challenges we're facing today on that agenda actually requires us to really get beneath this dignity point, because that's actually what's often getting in the way. We've got certain types of personality types that manifest through certain genders or races or other things that potentially are stronger or more hierarchical in their nature, and actually that therefore makes the situation even more difficult for others who we really want to get to the same level to come through, but can't because of the environment isn't there. And it's not them, it's the environment that we've created, or the context for them to find their voice.
Yeah. So I'm sort of reflecting as you're saying that, because I know from personal experience how hard it is to
Sorry, I probably touched a few nerves there, Marlies.
You did actually, but that's fine. I think it's good. But what I kept thinking about Tracy's point about, if you don't do it, that self-loathing in a way, it's a very strong word, I know, but it's that sort of, if you don't speak up, you really regret it so much, and it's a vicious circle, like you just, I don't know, it's really quite, it resonates so much. But it is that the question is, how do we help people to have that inner strength and that courage to speak up? Because the majority of people, let's face it, they just don't today, especially if they're in an environment that's toxic.
And I think, I mean, there is no easy answer to that, Marlies. If there was a single silver bullet, we'd all have one, I know. But I do think that we need to educate people about how to use their dignity, about how to be, for want of a better word, guardians of their dignity. Maybe that's the concept. We need to really think about how we bring this to life, because we've all got it. We all deserve it. It's the most precious thing that we have. What are we doing to not only preserve it, but most importantly, use it in a way that not only unlocks our own power, but those of others? Because actually, in a culture whereby dignity is honoured and cherished and respected by everyone, yes, I'm talking about utopia, but actually, ultimately, it's going to be a place where human relations, the ability to show compassion and kindness towards each other and to use one's voice is going to be so much easier. So I think education, it's really fascinating that something that's so inherent within us, we have to be taught how to use. But, that's probably what it boils down to.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking about creativity. So a few weeks ago, I spoke to David Lansfield about creativity. And that was the same sort of concept of you're born with it, right? We're all born with creativity, but somehow along the way we decide, I'm not creative. And it is, again, it's that sort of muscle, it's that skill that we've got to keep nurturing and developing. When you said that, Tracy, I was thinking about Tony Robbins' sort of 6 human needs, you know, and he basically says that your ultimate fulfillment comes from, you know, growth and learning and that sort of growth mindset. So you talk about education, but also then contribution. So what difference are you making in the world? How are you making the world a better place? And I think that is the ultimate, fulfillment, is that if you can be that person who can show up and be, you know, respectful and compassionate and loving to others, you know, you create that sort of fulfillment, that contribution, you know. And I think even though we're all just a little drop in the ocean, like, all the drops add up at the end of the day, you know. So I think it's important that we keep going and we keep raising awareness of this.
The only thing I would add, Marilise, to what we've already said is, and Joel talked about this in terms of inclusion and diversity, it's just to reflect on what we've seen happening this year through Black Lives Matter as a really good manifestation of a violation of dignity, where a sense of, you know, worth has not been treated, you know, where people have not been seen as equal, and the level playing field that we all deserve and have at our fingertips has not been given freely. And it's really interesting how it takes a global pandemic to really create this kind of pressure pot, which actually gives people a voice. We're talking about a climate of voice and about a movement and about an energy. And it's about, you know, the tolerance level of one's dignity. You get to the point where you say enough is enough. And I think of the way some of the corporations and companies that I'm working with have responded to Black Lives Matter. They've not seen it. They've seen it as a kind of business issue, as a challenge in the HR space, but it's a human issue and it's a dignity issue. And whether it's around race or about acceptance of one's sexual identity or religious backgrounds, it doesn't matter. It's all about respecting and identifying as our true selves, no matter where we are. And I just wanted to pick up that because I think it's so important that we recognise that.
I think you're right. I had 2 angles on there because I think they are the very powerful parts. And it goes back to my analogy of, if organizations are a reflection of society, you know, if we talk about society, what we're really talking about is the degradation of different minority or different groups, degrading certain groups or parts, or dehumanizing them, quite frankly, you know. And we don't want to go into the World War II and sort of other things or other holocausts that have gone along. But what is important is that we recognize that those same feelings can manifest very easily in organizations. And therefore, we really have to be on the lookout for that, because then it becomes far more systemic, and that becomes extremely dangerous for organisations, because then you are completely undermining your dignity, and quite frankly, you could never therefore have a purposeful approach or a culture based on purpose, because it just doesn't fit with what sits for certain of your employee groups in your organisation.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I want to pick up just on the fact that, you know, in order to, I don't think the majority of people don't, intentionally or consciously, want to inflict harm on others. You know, it's more a case of I'm not aware of the impact of my behavior on other people. But that makes the whole, I love the climate of voice. I love that, Tracy. It makes it even more important, because if you can say to someone, listen, this is kind of how what just happened here makes me feel. Is that what you sort of meant? Or, how, just making sense of it, but having that conversation, being brave to have that conversation. I think that also plays into then the relationship and being able to, you'll very quickly know whether the person was intentional or not, because you'll test it. And having that conversation, I think, is incredibly important.
And no one can take away your voice. Your voice is unique to you. Yes. We actually, if you take away appearances, you take away the visualization of individuals, the voice is your trademark. It's so much of who you are and what you stand for, and the emotion that you can express just through your voice and the pitch and the tone, never mind the words that you use. which is why I like it. I so much more prefer it than speaking up, which sounds dangerous to me. And I know it has lots of repercussions to many people, but for me that no, I just want to use my voice, in all sorts of ways that will generate opportunity and collaboration through the ability to be heard and listened to.
No, agreed. Very, very powerful.
So really important that we educate people around, it's really about giving yourself permission, to have that voice at the end of the day, because no one, as we said, you have your dignity. Unless you give it away on a silver platter, people can't really rob you from it. And I'll come back to what Nelson Mandela said, when he entered the prison for the first time, he said that the guards, they tried, they desperately tried to rob us of our dignity, but we won't allow them to, I think it's in his book, Long Walk to Freedom, which is a highly recommended read for anybody who wants to see a world icon example of dignity. So finally, I can talk to you all day. We can keep going, but unfortunately, we're sort of running out of time. I wanted to just pick up on resources, useful resources that people can go to if they want to know more about the topic, if they want to, become better leaders in terms of embedding, this in the organization's culture. Where can people go to find out more?
Well, I would definitely recommend the work of Donna Hicks. Yeah. So Donna is a leading negotiator, in fact, in many international conflicts around the world. She's an academic as well, and she's done a huge amount of research on the concept of dignity, which stemmed from her work on conflict. And she recognized that conflict was a sign that there's something wrong with the relationship, and the need to not only preserve but honour other people's dignity was at the heart of resolution. So she's written 2 books. The second one of which, Leading with Dignity, is the one which really focuses on organisations and how leaders can lead with dignity, which I'd really recommend. And obviously there's podcasts and her TED Talk that goes with that as well. But I also just wouldn't look at dignity on its own, because it is so linked. We've talked about trust, we've talked about respect, we've talked about, I think we may have talked about, or it might be in my head, empathy, the ability to connect and to emotionally have that rapport and that relationship. And I do think that actually looking at this in the whole round about how we act as human leaders is so important, because dignity is the platform of all of that. It's the base, it's the foundation upon which we can go on to achieve better things for all of us. So don't just look at it dignity in as a discrete self, but look at it in the whole in terms of what we can do to be better leaders as humans as well. What are your thoughts?
No, I don't think there's much more to add, because I think, Donna, particularly for business people, if that's where this is mainly tiered, I think she's summarized a lot of the research and the thinking. So there is more research and other studies that are out there that support that. I agree with Tracy. I go back to my ESG point. I think the society piece is becoming very, very important, but there's a lot now around just being a humanitarian, just actually understanding even things like poverty, refugees. We've got so much going on. There are all these themes going on that where people are starting to write and understand how we all need to act and behave in a way that has more dignity, that creates that real sense of just I value you for who you are. So for me, it's one of the blessings of our modern world is that there is such a wealth of information out there that we can all gather, and there's some great TED Talks and other things on the topic. I don't think it'll take people long to actually find a raft of information on the topic.
Just reading Donna's book, Tracy, on the back of our conversation, Donna Hicks, just really changed my life. It just opened so many doors. And I think there's one thing I would just sort of highlight. I think her first book is called Dignity. And there's this, I think she talks about 10 elements of dignity. So I think that's a really good checklist for leaders if they want to go and see what are the sorts of 10 things that we do when we treat people with dignity. I won't go through that now, but it's a really wonderful resource, because you can kind of literally go and you can see when any time there is a conflict situation, a relationship breaks down, you can sort of pinpoint where it's gone wrong.
Yeah.
And I think what we can do, and what Donna's provided through her work, is a framework, a vocabulary, so that we can talk about dignity. The very fact we're having this conversation right now about dignity, we should have been having this a long time ago, and why aren't we having it every single day? When we talk about some of the challenges we've got in businesses at the moment in terms of, surveillance at working at home or fear of speaking up, all these things, at its heart, it's about dignity. And if we can create a lexicon, a common ground where we can talk about it in terms of how I feel accepted, recognised, felt treated fairly, or whatever it might be, those 10 elements of what it means to act with dignity and feel like one's dignity is being honoured, then the easier it gets. It goes back to Joel's point around having those difficult conversations again.
Yeah.
And I would really, encourage people to challenge themselves about what they are doing to start that conversation and to use these words, because it will move very quickly beyond it to actually how it makes us feel and how we then behave as a consequence of that.
I agree. It's all about normalizing the conversation. I mean, I've had so many conversations over the last 6 months about mental health, and it feels like finally, people are recognizing, that it is an important conversation to have, and we're normalizing the conversation. So, I'll challenge everybody out there. Let's do the same with dignity. Let's start normalizing the conversation. I think that's so crucial.
And I agree with all of that. And I think when one looks at it, I think it's just the important piece for me is systemically, it's two sides. It's how do we make sure the environment creates the context for people to feel belonging and to feel that they can be more of themselves more of the time, where they can feel empowered versus micromanaged. And then the second point, I think, plays to your book and to what we've all been talking about here, is how as an individual can we not allow I think your thing is your internal bully, but it's basically allow our critical inner self to let us down, to mean we don't say the things that should have been said. And I think it's important to approach it from both of those sides, because it requires both of those to arrive at that adult to adult center.
Yeah.
I think the adult to adults, even if it's just frame of referencing, in terms of framing, I should say, when you go into a conversation with someone, it's like giving yourself permission to engage at an adult level, especially when there's a hierarchy. I think often, and especially when we're younger, we put people on pedestals. So I always encourage, the younger people that I mentor to go into a conversation with that sort of adult mentality. I think it makes such a difference. So I would really encourage people to do more of that. That's such useful advice. So thank you so much both. Amazing conversations. I've learned so much just in the short 30 minutes that we've been together. So I really appreciate you both. Thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
Brilliant. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Joel and Marylise.
Thank you both too. Okay.